just resigned from the Boulder Police Department, claiming, quote, "We have failed a little girl named JonBenet." Now Thomas has written a book on the case, JonBenet Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation.
Then a couple of months later, in May of 2000, the Ramseys go head-to-head with this Steve Thomas on Larry King.
Patsy, you could have been arrested in this case.
I wish I had been, and then we would have had a free and fair trial, and you would have met your Waterloo, Mr. Thomas.
Are you saying that you would have let her answer the question, John? Why don't you let your wife answer the question?
Because you have assaulted her. You've called her a murderer.
How is it exactly that you think that I killed my daughter? I just cannot understand that. I want to hear it from start to finish.
Patsy,
Tell me
I wasn't
exactly
there.
what
You were
happened.
at home that night, and apparently you say you
Tell me what
can't
happened,
say for
Mr.
certainty you were in the house, right?
Yes,
Am I
certainly was.
assuming-
Answer my question, please.
Certainly.
I wasn't there, so we can't know for sure. Yes, that's the theory. All right.
Yeah, and you've heard the theory. I offered a hypothesis.
Please answer my question.
I think there was a toileting issue that night that has been dismissed and underplayed. A bedwetting or a toileting issue.
That caused Patsy to get mad at her daughter.
Absolutely.
Steve Thomas, worse.
So in other words, she killed her daughter in a rage over the bedwetting, and then Garrett.
It was like great television, I guess, but there's a dead kid here in this story. I mean, it's a terrible tragedy, and we got this circus going on.
The address of what was the Ramsey home in Boulder has been changed. The family has moved to Atlanta. But one thing has not changed in 5 years. JonBenet's killer remains at large.
For many years in the 2000s, the case just wasn't going anywhere. There were just dead ends. Then, in 2006, the case suddenly became headline news all over again.
The latest tragic turn in the most sensational child murder mystery of our time. JonBenet Ramsey's mother, Patsy Ramsey, laid to rest yesterday after losing her 13-year battle with cancer.
She started with ovarian cancer. She became free of that. It resurfaced as abdominal cancer and spread to her brain, and she ultimately died of brain cancer.
I think if you're one of those people that believe Patsy Ramsey was somehow involved with either the murder or the cover-up of her daughter, when she died, that secret died with her.
I do remember when she died that one of the district attorneys, who was with a group of police officers, said, well, we're kind of feeling that it goes full circle. She got what she deserved. I said, you know, that's a really horrible thing to say. You don't know if she killed her daughter.
And then, within weeks of Patsy's death, there was a huge break in the case.
Breaking news tonight after a decade-long investigation and arrest in the JonBenet Ramsey murder case.
Welcome back to How It Really Happened. It's no secret that most police investigators believe Patsy Ramsey was involved in her daughter's death. So when she died in August of 2006, they likely assumed the case would die with her. But just 7 weeks after Patsy's death, a new suspect emerged, seemingly out of the blue, and the focus of the police investigation shifted back to the intruder theory.
Breaking news tonight after a decade-long investigation and arrest in the JonBenet Ramsey murder case.
John Mark Carr, 41 years old, was arrested for the murder of JonBenet Ramsey yesterday morning at approximately 6 a.m. in Bangkok, Thailand.
It's a day we've been waiting for 10 years, and I hope this is a first major step in really drawing this to a conclusion.
A stunning confession from the man arrested in Thailand for the murder of JonBenet Ramsey.
I was with JonBenet when she died. Her death was an accident.
So here was this guy, he was a teacher, he was in Thailand, and he surfaces out of the blue and confesses to the murder of JonBenet Ramsey.
When we saw that picture, that first picture of John Mark Carr, my initial reaction was, well, that's not what I expected. He was a slight man, a petite man, sort of delicate features, not what you would think about when you're thinking of worried about the boogeyman breaking into your house and this intruder theory. He wasn't the intruder that I had in my mind.
Mainly what we know about this this guy is that we don't know much. His name didn't come up in the beginning of all these investigations. He's a bit of a blank page to everybody out there, even those of us who've covered this case very, very closely.
Carr was a guy who had been obsessed with the JonBenet case for many years. So much so that I think some of his relatives thought he was writing a book about it.
I love JonBenet. Died accident.
So the Boulder district attorney has this guy arrested in Thailand, John Mark Carr, flies him back to the U.S. for questioning.
With immigration and customs enforcement agents at his side, murder suspect John Mark Carr made the 15-hour journey from Bangkok to Los Angeles Sunday aboard a Thai Airways jet.
He's going to be fingerprinted and photographed. We will make his mugshot available.
So the district attorney is very optimistic that they've finally found JonBenet's killer. But there were others connected to the case who were more skeptical.
There was still a huge faction of the American public that believed the family was somehow involved. This felt like it tied it up with a bow a little bit too neatly for people, I think.
Bob Grant, what do you make of all of this?
Larry, it's another bizarre turn in a bizarre case. I'm withholding judgment until I see the results of the DNA test. I think that tells the story. I always knew that whatever this guy had to say wasn't going to hold water unless he was the source of that DNA in the panties.
There's a tiny amount of unidentified DNA on the waistband of JonBenet Ramsey's long johns.
Physical evidence is what's going to rule the day. Physical evidence is what's going to close this case.
If the DNA on JonBenet's waistband was a match with John Mark Carr, well then, please have their killer.
The DA tests this little teeny bit of DNA that was found on JonBenet's waistband against John Mark Carr's DNA, waiting for the big connection, and found that they didn't match. So after all of the drama and all of the effort that went into arresting this guy, they then concluded he didn't do it.
Court documents show investigators were unable to place Carr in Boulder at the time of the murder, his family claiming he was with them in Georgia. And most importantly, Carr's DNA, just tested at Denver's crime lab, was not a match to the DNA found on JonBenet.
I think he may have welcomed a lot of the attention. I don't know why someone would confess to a crime they didn't commit unless they just basically wanted to be famous or infamous. I can't speak to his motives, but he was still confessing after the DA's office had pretty much satisfied itself that he wasn't the guy.
He wanted his, as Andy Warhol said, 15 minutes of fame. This is a terrible way to go about getting it.
Turned out that he was just a nutcase who needed a ride back from Thailand and got one at the expense of the state.
With that, Carr becomes simply a man obsessed with the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, who fabricated a story and tried to transplant himself into it. As for the case, it remains unsolved.
John Mark Carr walks free. What was the Colorado District Attorney thinking?
She said he was a credible suspect. And I don't think he was ever a credible suspect. There should have been some effort to determine whether he's even in Colorado when this happened.
It was a tremendous embarrassment for the Boulder DA's office. Tremendous. And the person at the time who was in charge was Mary Lacey. It was a huge, huge gaffe on her part. Now, to her credit, I will say this. She held, I think, the mother of all news conferences and stayed and answered, every question once, she realized she was wrong.
I want to make it absolutely clear up front, the decisions were mine, the responsibility is mine, and I should be held accountable for all decisions in this case. Last night, as I was preparing to leave, I received a telephone call from a gentleman in Longmont. He said you should be tarred and feathered and run out of town. And it's not just one, there were a lot of calls like that.
After the John Mark Carr fiasco, the story went quiet for a few years. In 2008, the case was back in the news when new technology was used to retest the clothes that JonBenet Ramsey was wearing the night she was murdered.
newly discovered DNA evidence emerges by use of a new and highly sensitive DNA procedure called touch DNA. Will it finally crack the murder case of 6-year-old Colorado beauty queen JonBenet Ramsey?
The DNA profile that we obtained is attributed to an unknown male.
Newly discovered DNA evidence does not match any Ramsey family member.
That same district attorney who arrested John Mark Carr also gave a lot more weight than her critics did to new DNA testing. And based on that, she formally exonerated the entire Ramsey family.
The Boulder DA has released a letter officially clearing the Ramsey family of any involvement in the December 1996 death of the 6-year-old. The DNA from the male did not match anyone in law enforcement DNA databases.
This new scientific evidence convinces us that it is appropriate, given the circumstances of this case, to state that we do not consider your immediate family, including you, your wife Patsy, and your son Burke, to be under any suspicion in the commission of this crime.
I look at it as a congratulatory letter to the Ramseys. Congratulations, you're off the hook. So, good day for John Ramsey, good day for Patsy. That they have a prosecutor now on record is saying that the prosecutor believes that there's physical evidence that someone else did it, and that the parents weren't involved.
What Mary Lacey did next was she actually apologized to the Ramsey family for them ever being considered suspects. To the extent that we may have contributed in any way to the public perception that you might have been involved in this crime, I'm deeply sorry. No innocent person should have to endure such an extensive trial in the court of public opinion.
There are a lot of people who question whether this touch DNA was enough to clear these people, much less apologize to them.
I was unimpressed with the decision to write the letter. I was unimpressed with the letter. And from what I know about touch DNA, it simply is not reliable enough to support the kind of decision that was made by District Attorney Lacey.
Those who did not like it that she had written that letter said, hey, if it is proven to be the Ramseys, you've written a letter of apology. How are we going to take this to court? I think the case had many more serious problems than that letter.
So that was it. After a dozen years of being under the microscope, then the entire Ramsey family was in the clear. But that was about to change in a big way.
Bombshell tonight in the last hours, we get proof. A Colorado grand jury votes to indict JonBenet's parents, John and Patsy Ramsey.
By this district attorney, then the case goes cold again. And then, in 2013, this local news reporter gets a tip, and he finds out that the grand jury decision 14 years earlier was not what it seemed.
So a reporter on the case, Charlie Brennan, said, I want to see the records. I want to see what the grand jury did in secret, because he had been hearing from grand jurors who said they did decide to indict in the case.
So that reporter, Charlie Brennan, he wanted to get a hold of the grand jury's decision. But to do that, he had to sue the DA's office.
And I don't think most of us could believe it. He won, and they unsealed those grand jury records in 2013, and we got to see the indictment for ourselves. It was quite illuminating.
This morning we have new details in the case of JonBenet Ramsey. A local paper, the Boulder Daily Camera, reports that a grand jury voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey for abuse that led to JonBenet's death.
But the district attorney declined to prosecute.
So what that means is the grand jury decides to indict the Ramseys. But the DA discards their decision and decides not to proceed.
The grand jury said both of the girls' parents, John and Patsy, did unlawfully, knowingly, recklessly, and feloniously permit a child to be placed in a situation which posed a threat of injury, which resulted in the death of JonBenet Ramsey.
This was explosive because it totally contradicted what Alex Hunter, the DA at the time, had actually told people back in 1999.
I and my
by Prosecution Task Force believe we do not have sufficient evidence to warrant the filing of charges against anyone who has been investigated at this time.
Alex Hunter essentially decided to veto the grand jury's decision. Now, prosecutors do have that option, but the issue here is a lot of people felt he hadn't been entirely upfront.
The public was misled. We were told that the grand jury met for all these months and there was no indictment. But in fact, the grand jury had wanted to file charges in this case. That was something that was kept away from the public for more than a decade.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating to know what they found out, because the grand jury interviewed so many people.
The judge took a look at it and decided only to release 4 pages of some 18 pages, because they were the ones with the basic charges on them and the ones that were signed by the grand jury foreman.
So what was in those 14 pages that wasn't released when all this other information was released about the grand jury meeting? Wonder if we'll ever see that. It would be fascinating.
What else don't we know? I mean, where's the rest of these pages that went with this, where the grand jury explained, you know, what the reasoning was behind these charges, what the specific acts that were committed that led to these charges. And we don't have those to this day.
I'm not particularly happy that the entire thing was not disclosed. We're not going to get a judge to order the rest of those pages released. At least not before I retire.
Again, it's a mystery at this point. Do you truly think the perpetrator will be found?
There was one other person in the house that night, besides Patsy and JonBenet, and that is JonBenet's older brother, Burke, who was then 9 years old. He was officially cleared in 2008, and he has never gone public, which has led to a lot of speculation about what he saw and what he knew that night.
Even if Burke were to have some miraculous memory that could lead to the arrest of a suspect, that information would be so dated and so questionable that most criminal defense attorneys would have a heyday with it at trial. It's very problematic to be using information that would be so stale from an individual who did not remember it before. The colder the case gets, the colder the trail gets.
Burke finally broke his silence just before the 20th anniversary of his sister's death. He decided that he would do a sit-down on the Dr. Phil TV show.
Did you hit your sister over the head with a baseball bat or a flashlight?
Absolutely not.
If someone in your house did, do you think you would have heard it?
Probably. Yeah.
No, everybody's got a theory. There's the Burke group, the John group, the Patsy group, the intruder group, and they all feel very passionately that they're right and everybody else is wrong.
This isn't rocket science. Do you think she was disciplining the child and got out of hand?
My guess is, yeah, there was some sort of explosive encounter between mother and daughter that resulted in this child's death.
For those of you who may want to ask, let me address very directly. I did not kill my daughter, JonBenet. There have also been innuendos that she has been or was sexually molested. They are totally false.
I'm appalled that anyone would think that John or I would be involved in such a hideous, heinous crime. But let me assure you that I did not kill JonBenet.
I think from the very start, there's a sense this case might just become a cold case. And it has become, you know, the mother of all cold cases at this point. The prospect that we're ever going to see a legal resolution of this case, I think, is very, very dim at this point.
Had you asked me then, will this be a story in 20 years? I would have laughed and said, absolutely not. There will be an arrest in this case, and probably quickly. No one could have foreseen what happened over the next 20 years. I wouldn't be surprised if we never know what actually happened in that basement, and it'll always stay a whodunit.
This is a little girl who should be in her mid-20s right now. And we're all dancing around about JonBenet and trying to figure out what happened. And what happened is she's dead. And nobody knows who did it. And nobody solved the case.
HLN did reach out to the Boulder County DA's office with a Freedom of Information request for the rest of the grand jury findings. But a representative denied our request, saying they'd be in contempt of court if they released the additional pages. Today, the murder of JonBenet Ramsey is officially considered a cold case. The Boulder PD has detectives assigned to it, and they do follow leads when they get them. But so far, they've only been dead ends. Let's hope that someday there will be justice for JonBenet Ramsey. I'm Hill Harper. Thanks for watching.